Good evening, everyone. Both our audience here in the webinar as well as live on Facebook. Welcome to the fourth episode of True Talks for Coaches, a live masterclass for coaches and aspiring coaches who want to learn more about life coaching. And to answer our questions, we have with us Nitin Shah, founder and director, iCharts and iChart Support Foundation. Welcome, Nitin.
Thank you, Mamta. How are you?
I'm good.
And
So
I would also like to welcome everyone who is there on the Zoom session and also who is there on the Facebook session. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
Perfect. And it would be great if you can drop us a hello so that we know who all are there with us this evening. And before I begin, I would just like to briefly introduce iChars. iChars is an organization that's committed to behavioral, mental, and emotional growth of people, especially through helping coaches and therapists develop advanced coaching and therapeutic skills. And this masterclass is also an endeavor in the same direction. So Nitin, we have been talking about what life coaching is, what competencies does a coach need in order to effectively help their clients create meaningful, sustainable change. What are these, coaching competencies and what all? Now let's start talking about specifics.
So Mamta, before we go on to the coaching competencies, would you be kind enough to summarize what we have covered in the episode 1 and 2?
Okay. Okay. So we spoke about how coaching is an effective model of change and how a coach works with their clients, helps them establish very precise and defined goals, an actionable plan that they can execute, and actually start implementing it. So standard life coaching models work around a concept in which the coach helps the client do all this, establish goals, plan of action, and start working towards it, and also acts as an accountability partner for the client so that the client can actually execute it, right? And then so this is how basic coaching models generally work around. And we looked at specific coaching models like grow, T-grow, regrow, and some other models which work around, let's say, emotional intelligence and so on. And we also learned about a very specific, a highly effective model that iChars has developed in-house, which we call SOFC, which also includes very vital elements that are needed to help the client create meaningful and lasting change, especially helping the client create a compelling vision of the future in a very observable, sensory specific manner, as well as helping them overcome the unconscious, not only the conscious hindrances, but also the unconscious hindrances. And we went on to also understand how coaching is different from therapy, how coaching is different from mentoring and training, and so on. I think I've touched upon almost everything. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
I think I couldn't have summarized it better than what you have summarized. So this was like brilliant. Good. So coming to what we are doing today, which is about coaching competencies, right? So would you be able to repeat the question for today, what you have just asked me in the beginning?
Yeah, so let's begin by answering what are coaching competencies and what skills does a coach need in order to actually do whatever we just spoke about.
Okay. So first, coaching competencies are basically those skills, those competencies that coaches need to have to be able to work with their coaches, obviously in a way in which the coaches can achieve the desired outcome.
Correct.
Right. Now, like you mentioned earlier in the previous session, we discussed about the different models, but those models are only as good as your competencies are. Right. What do I mean by this? Let's say I give you that model of grow or regrow, right? But you have no idea how to listen to clients.
Correct.
Right. Or how to ask questions. Or if you don't know how to help the client act as an help the client stick to their commitments, right, then would that coaching model be useful?
No, obviously no. I mean,
because eventually when we are working with those coaching models, they are just the guidelines, just the framework, but in that framework you as a coach have to do a lot of things with the client, right? And all of those specific skills that you need that will help you work with your clients effectively can be classified as coaching competencies.
Correct.
Right? Now, there are different kinds of coaching competencies, and we broadly divide them into 4 categories. And then each of these categories has subcategories. So I'm kind of walking you through each of these categories and subcategories right now. And we will probably take up the first 2 categories today.
Okay, all right.
So the first one is what we call as setting the foundation. Now, this obviously is a very important skill that a coach needs. They need to know how to be able to begin a session, how to be able to work with clients or coaches in a way in which they feel completely comfortable, right? And as a part of this category, the subcategories would be meeting ethical guidelines and being able to establish a coaching agreement.
Okay.
Are we clear till here?
Yes, broadly, yes.
Broadly, yes, right?
Yeah.
So we will go into details of each of them, but just I'm kind of clarifying what the competencies are, broadly speaking, to begin with.
Okay.
Now, after we have set the foundation, the next idea is to co-create a relationship with the coachee.
Makes sense, yes.
Right? So that's the broad category. And the subcategory or sub points under that would be using a flexible approach that is client-centric. So obviously that's a competency in itself. Being able to manage your presence as a coach in the session and establishing a trust-based relationship with the client.
Right.
Makes sense till here?
Yes. Those sound like the very basis of, the entire process.
Correct. So the whole idea of coaching competencies is that you are covering all skills from the basic to the most advanced ones.
Right.
Right. And then we get into a more specific set of skills. So the next category is communicating effectively, which would then include engaged listening and powerful questioning.
Okay. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then the last category of competency is what we call as facilitating learning and result, which is where change in clients take place.
Okay.
And the subcategories would include helping clients raise awareness and insights, because obviously it's those awareness, that insights that will open up possibilities for the client.
Right.
Helping client get into a state where they invite possibility.
Okay.
Because you will notice there are places where clients may have the awareness, but they're still not willing to invite that possibility of applying that awareness into change.
Right.
Right. While goal setting is what is a standard competency, for us, we also focus on ecological goal setting. Right? And ecological basically means that when you create a goal, every aspect of your life needs to achieve a positive result through it. It should not happen that you start working on a goal that starts affecting other areas of your life negatively.
Right.
Next is being able to design actions where you actually help clients design their actions.
Right.
Now these are, and managing progress and accountability, where you have the competencies to be able to help your coaches become more accountable and responsible for what's happening in their life. The additional competency that we add on top of this is working with conscious and unconscious hindrances.
Yes.
Okay. So these are like the broad, broad categories and subpoints in that. Today, in the episode, we would be focusing on the first 2 broad categories, setting the foundation and co-creating the relationship.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Before I ask any more questions, I would request everybody to keep asking any questions that you may have at any point, because now we're getting into the specifics of, the skills and competencies that you would need going forward in your practice as a coach or training as a coach. So please keep asking questions, leaving comments, feedbacks, any observations or thoughts that you may have, both on Zoom and people who are watching us on Facebook. All right.
On Facebook, people who are watching us, please use the chat box right now. And then in the end, we would also, after we have finished the live, we would also, if possible, take all of you on the video and continue the discussion.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. So Nitin, I think you began by talking about some ethical guidelines and professional standards. So what are these guidelines or standards specifically with respect to life coaching? While we do know that, there are ethical guidelines and in every field, but what specifically in life coaching?
Okay. So when we talk about ethical guidelines in life coaching, what we're talking about is, first, as a life coach, you should know where your boundaries are, right? Uh, this we had covered earlier in one of the episodes where we spoke about the difference between coaches and therapists, right? But it's the demarcation between the two fields is quite clear. That as a coach, you are not supposed to work with intense negative emotions and disorders.
Right.
And a therapist can work with intense negative emotion and disorder. So as an ethical guideline, that's the first guideline, where you don't overreach what your skill sets are. You know what you can do, you also know what you can't do, and you stay within the boundaries of what you are supposed to do.
Okay.
Right? That's the first ethical boundary. Second,
Right.
obviously, the standard boundaries about confidentiality,
Yes, that's important. Yeah.
about the fact that it's the coachee who's supposed to come up with the outcome and should work towards that outcome. You're only acting as a facilitator. You're not supposed to give them suggestions, or you're not supposed to give them advices.
Yeah, Nitin, I think that's really critical because, depending on how people have trained and so on, I think that's a big skill that people need to develop, to know when to step back and let the coachee lead the entire process.
Correct. And that, for us, while that's a skill in itself separately, but it's also part of the ethical guidelines, because from the point of view of ethics, you are not supposed to influence the client by your ideas or your suggestions. You need to remain completely unbiased, completely neutral. Yes, you can ask them questions to be able to explore the options that they have, but
Yep.
you are not supposed to add those options or subtract those options for them.
Perfect.
Right? Then apart from this, the ethical guidelines would also include that obviously you are not intentionally working with a client where you know that the client is going to create a risk of life for themselves and for others.
Okay.
Right? Whenever a client has a need for other specialists to step in, you will not again overreach your boundary. So, for example, you're a coach, you're working with a client for weight management, and the client wants you to give them ideas about diet plans. Now, you are not a specialist in diet plans, so don't go Google on search on Google and give a diet plan to the client.
Right.
Right? Now, these are really commonsensical things, but the thing is that a lot of times we make this mistake. Right? And that we need to be careful about. Also, in terms of professional standards, obviously, what kind of setup you practice in. So you have to ensure that the setup that you're practicing in is safe for the client, while you maintain confidentiality for the client. But the setup is also conducive to confidentiality. What I mean is, for example, let's say you you maintain documentations for the clients, right? But your documentations are free floating; they are all over the place in your office. Anyone can step in and check those documentations.
Yeah.
Then that's obviously not in sync with the ethical guidelines and professional standards.
Correct.
So broadly speaking, these will be ethical guidelines and professional standards. But as I said, the most important of them is the fact that you know where your boundaries are and you stop over there. You don't work with intense negative emotions and disorders unless you're a trained therapist. You don't give diet plans unless you're a dietitian. You don't recommend people what physical exercises to do unless you are also a trained practitioner in terms of yoga, or someone who is an instructor for physical activities.
Correct. Fair enough.
Right.
Right. Okay. Nitin, there's a question here, and I think the question is around boundaries. Palak is asking, a person who is 23 years old is going through a breakup, feels like dying. You're coaching them, but should you also ask for their parents' contact? Should you reach out to their parents?
If they feel like dying, then ideally you should not be coaching them. You should be referring them to a therapist.
Absolutely.
Okay. Having said that, whenever, in general, whenever there is a risk at life, it's important that you involve someone who is who can be with the client when you are not there, so that they can be safe. But this is only in matters related to life and death, when someone's life is at risk. Otherwise, confidentiality takes over everything else. In matters related to life and death, where someone's life is at risk, that's the only place that probably you will overrule the importance of confidentiality.
Okay. She has another question, Nitin, which we have answered earlier, and I think you also touched upon it just now. She's asking for the difference between therapists and coaches.
So Palak, I think I just answered that question. Just let me know if that has answered your question, or if you have a follow-up question, just ask so that I can clarify that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Also, just to add to that, coaches don't require an educational qualification per se. It's their skill sets that determine whether they can practice as a coach or not. But for psychologists, not therapists, but for psychologists, you need to complete your master's in psychology.
I think that answers. Okay. She says that helps. I'm a movement therapy practitioner.
Okay.
Okay. So Nitin, coming to now that we know what.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mamta. Actually, I said that because, like as Nitin pointed out, that if you're coaching them, then instead of coaching them, you refer them to a therapist. So right now, if I am in the position of a therapist, so like if I can get an answer to that question, that what should I do? Because the person I am talking to, might or might not give his parents contact. So maybe like, I am very, I don't want his life to be at risk, of course. So like, how can I wear the confidentiality in a way that he feels safe, that fine, that whatever my therapist is doing for me is for my own good. So, yeah.
See, Palak, so as I mentioned, for us, the idea is if the life is at risk, then you need to inform one, the parent. Second, ideally speaking, you should also be informing police. Now, in India, the rules are not that clearly specified, but internationally, when I speak to people who practice, they are very clear that the guidelines internationally are, if you have a client who has a suicidal tendency, you have to inform at least 3 of your peer colleagues and inform inform the nearest police station that this is a scenario which is possible, so that you can safeguard yourself. Having said that, because I said in India, this is there is, as far as I am aware of, there is no clear legal understanding of what needs to be done. At the best, you need to be able to speak to the parents. If the client is not willing to give details about the parents, see if you can find out details about one of their friends or something who can be kept in the loop. But that you will have to ask the client, right? Generally, what we do is when the client is filling up the initial information sheet, in that they have to give a contact detail of at least one person in their near and dear one. So we already have the contact details before we start working with the client.
Right. Yeah, I hope, Palak, you have your answer. If not, then you can ask a follow-up question in the chat.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Perfect. Yes, Nitin, now that we know about the ethical guidelines and the standards that a coach should follow, you also spoke about establishing the coaching agreement. So how do we do that?
Okay, so first tell me, according to you, what will be a coaching agreement?
Okay, so coaching agreement is a mutual agreement between the coach and the coachee, in which they establish mutual expectations.
And
agree to fulfill them.
So a coaching agreement would basically be like a understanding between the coachee and the coach, detailing what is the coaching process, what is the concern that the coachee wants to work with, what is the outcome that they want to achieve, what will be the specific parameters within which the coaching agreement will work, in the sense what is expected out of the coach and what is expected out of the coachee. The coaching agreement would also need to establish that it's a relationship between the coach and the coachee where both have to work. It's not that the coach is supposed to get everything done from the coachee. The coachee is equally responsible as a part of the process. So for example, when I'm working with the coachees to begin with, I would establish it with the coachee that there would be certain homeworks that will be given to them, and it's the coachee's responsibility to complete those homework. Having said that, if the coachee is facing difficulties in completing that homework, then I would work with the coachee to help them overcome those difficulties. But the responsibility to complete the homework is the coachee's.
Correct.
Right? Also, as a part of the coaching agreement, it's a good idea to describe what your entire coaching process would be. So if you're going to use a particular coaching model, describe the coaching model to the coachee, because the coachee can then decide whether they are able to understand what you're saying and whether they are in sync with you or not. Right. Again, for me personally speaking, because we use SoftC and SoftC kind of covers a huge gamut of things. I've never had a situation where a client, after listening to SoftC, has told me that this would not work for me. But I've also heard from other coaches where they've discussed a particular model with the coachee. The coachee said, no, I don't think this will work for me because I've already done goal setting and da. And then the coach spoke about alternate model, and the coachee said that, yeah, I think I would I would resonate with this model more. Right. So it may make sense to be able to speak about those coaching models with the clients in the initial session, so that again the expectations are very well and very clearly laid out.
Fair enough. Perfect. Nitin, there is a question by Sumanlata on Facebook. She says, can you please explain about PG in psychology, regular mode and UGC accredited correspondence mode to work as a therapist? Can you highlight, because many pass out and have this problem?
So Sumanlata, I would answer that question for you probably at the end of the session, because that's not really related to coaching and what we are doing today, but I would answer that question at the end.
Perfect. Okay. So
also, so also as a part of the coaching agreement, it's literally an agreement. The client has to sign it, in the sense that the client will be given a client, what do we call, consent form, where the client would, after listening to us, after having the initial discussion, read the terms of the consent form, sign the consent form, which will also include the number of expected sessions we are talking about. What will be the deliverables by the end of the expected sessions? What will be the charges for the sessions? And any other guidelines that you want to put in, including, for example, I would also have in the coaching agreement that these sessions would be recorded for future purposes, whether the client agrees with that or not. Now, if the client agrees, I would record the sessions. If the client does not agree, then obviously I would not record the session.
All right. So I think many valid points there. And that also helps us understand why the coaching agreement is so important, because it, one, not only makes things very specific, both for the coach and the coachee, so that, there's no dissatisfaction or, things like you promised to do this and you did not deliver this and so on. And also from the coachee side, that they, actually agree and sign on a piece of paper that they'll do homework and they'll, do their bit in the coaching process. So I think that's really important, because Nitin, I mean, maybe I'm going out of this. I think that also would be maybe not a coaching agreement, but a therapy agreement between a therapist and their clients.
Yeah, so to that extent, the definition of the agreement would remain the same between the therapist and the coaches.
Right.
The only thing is what you're working with. Probably the scope of that would change as a part of the definition.
Yes, of course. Right. Perfect. Got that point. Okay. So obviously, now that we are talking about mutual expectation setting with the agreement, what kind of relationship will a coach and coachee have ideally? And why is it important to, define that relationship and actually establish it? Wouldn't it evolve as we go along?
See, so the relationship evolves as it goes ahead, right? But the overall framework for the relationship, needs to
Okay.
be specified in advance, and that's where the coaching agreement comes in. So for example, let's say a coachee comes and expects that I would not complete any homework, but I want to get all the results that I want. Right now, this needs to be clarified in the beginning itself. That's a relationship between two people where both of us are going to partner in the process. But the work has to be done by the client or the coachee.
Right.
Right. So therefore, defining the framework becomes important.
Yeah.
Now, as a part of this framework comes the next category, which is co-creating the relationship. Because while I can establish the contract and the agreement, but the actual interaction between me and my client is not just driven by that agreement. That agreement is on a paper. It's my skill to be able to help the coachee operate within that agreement, and for me to continue operating within the agreement so that I don't overreach, and the coachee also understands that it's important to remain within that agreement.
Fair enough.
Right? And that's where co-creating the relationship comes in. Now, as a part of that, remember I mentioned that there are subcategories in this competency as well. First is the flexible approach, that is client-centric. Now, in the previous episode, when we spoke about coaching models, we literally defined the structure, where I said that in the first step, you are going for the goal, depending upon what model you are looking for. So if you're looking at grow, the first step, you are focusing on goals. Second step, you are focusing on current reality, and so on. So it looks very structured, right? At the same time, your model has to be flexible enough. And to be true, not the model, you have to be flexible enough to incorporate the requirements of the client.
Right.
What do I mean by this is, let's say you're talking about the goal. And while talking about the goal, the client starts talking about the current challenge that they are facing.
Right.
Right. You need to have the flexibility to hear the client's current challenges, so that you are not completely discarding them, or you are not completely making the client feel that you are not willing to listen to that.
Right.
And at the same time, you need to have the skill to be able to bring them back from that current reality, so that they can connect that current reality to the desired outcome.
Perfect.
Right. So for example, I was working with the client, and the client told, so I asked the client that, all right, what kind of income would you like to achieve? That was the coaching thing that we were doing. So we were defining the income. The client said, I would like to have at least 2x the income of what I'm having today. But given the circumstances today that I'm in the lockdown phase, and I have the challenges that I'm facing. So now they started talking about the present. Right. Now, one way is I tell them, all right, we'll talk about present after some time. Let's talk about what the figure would be. But this may give the coachee or the client a feeling that you're not letting them complete.
Yeah.
Right. The alternate way would be to hear them out. Obviously, not hear them out in the sense that let them talk about the entire current situation for the next 45 minutes. But give them time so that they are able to talk about their current challenge and say, all right, and now that you've told me this, if you're able to overcome these challenges, or when you're able to overcome these challenges, what is the figure that you're going to be able to reach?
Right.
So in your head, you know that you're focusing on the goal in the first step, but yet your questioning and your approach is flexible enough to not make the coachee feel that they are not being given a chance to speak about what they want to speak about.
Right. Right. Almost as if you're on the same page.
So yes, that you're actually not as if, truly you're on the same page.
Truly on the same page, yeah.
Which is one, and and that's when I said that it's flexible. An alternate example of this would be, so for example, when people use EI coaching, right? So in emotional intelligence, there's a particular understanding that people have about what each of the emotional word means. So what does the word sadness mean? What does the word happiness mean? What does the word excitement mean? So certain people have a very clear definition of those words as far as coaches are concerned. Right? But your coachee is not trained in emotional intelligence.
Right.
They may not have the same definition of the word as you have.
Correct.
Right. So you need to have that flexibility of being able to accommodate the client's language and the client's understanding of those emotions and work around it. It can't be that the client has to agree with your understanding of the word sadness and then work along with it. right?
Right.
So that's what we mean by a flexible client-centric approach, where while the client is there, while you're following a structure, but the process is being driven by the client.
Right. Right. Perfect. Perfect. Nitin, there's a question by Kyle. They're saying you said coaches should not suggest anything and the client himself or herself has to choose what they want. But the question is, the client comes to the coach to help him with the problem. If the coach doesn't give any suggestions, will that not develop a mistrust and they will not open up? Is that right?
No. So when a coachee comes to a coach, they come to a coach because they would like to resolve a problem. They are not looking for an advice.
Right.
Let me put it this way. Any coachee who goes to a coach is not their first line of resort. They've already spoken to their family members,
Correct.
their friends,
Right.
their colleagues, probably even their drivers, if they have a driver.
Right. They have
All the
looked up
challenges there.
online, they have found videos, watched videos, listened to motivational speakers.
Correct. So they already have all the advice.
Yep.
They are not there to seek advice from a coach. They are there because for whatever reason, whatever choices they have, they have not been able to select the right choice, right for them, right? So the coach's work is to be able to ask them the right set of questions to begin with, so that they can identify what the right choice is. The coach is not supposed to tell them what the right choice is. It's the coach who is supposed to come up with that answer. Now, as an extension of that, the coach also has to work towards helping the coachee apply that right choice.
Correct.
So, for example, if a coachee comes and says that I would like to switch my job. So let's say a coachee comes and says that I want to make more money. I'm not sure how. Right. One is I can tell a coachee that, why not leave your job and start with your own business? Your business has more scope, or the business that you want to set up has more scope. But then that's an advice from me, right? Who am I to decide that? Alternatively, I can ask the coachee, what are the options that you have? What are the different ways of earning more money? And then coachee thinks and tells me I can continue with my job, probably take up certain things part-time, start working during the evenings also, take up more responsibility in my office. Or I'm thinking I can also start my own business. Now I ask them for pros and cons of each of those areas.
Correct.
Right? Now, when I ask them those pros and cons, the answers are still coming from the coachee. Right? And therefore it's client-centric. And then the coachee decides at the end that, all right, given that these are the pros and cons of all the options, this is the option that I want to select. Now, my question to the coachee would be, now that you have selected this option, would you be able to act upon it? So if the coachee says yes, then you're only acting as a responsibility partner. You will break it down into smaller chunks and help the coachee apply it. And the coachee reports to you weekly basis that they are able to apply it or not. Alternatively, the coachee can say there are certain things which are stopping me from applying it. There are some thoughts, some emotions, some fears. Now, I'm not talking about fears in terms of intense fears, but it could also be that I'm not sure whether this will work or not. Right? So then my work as a coach, especially in the kind of work that we do, also becomes to help coachees overcome those thoughts and change those ongoing emotions that they have.
Right.
Right? Now, there obviously the techniques that we will use, right? So for example, if I have to help the client restructure a thought, the process for thought restructuring is decided by me, but the new thought is decided by the coachee. That I can't decide for the coachee.
Right.
Right. Just let me know if you understand what do I mean by restructuring thoughts. If you don't, ask the question so that I can clarify that also, probably with an example.
Right. Perfect. Perfect. So you cannot provide clarity, make decisions, or apply those decisions on their behalf. You can help them and facilitate, ask the right questions, and help them become aware of the choices, the clarity they need, and how they can apply. Right.
Correct. So basically, the bottom line is that the process is completely client-centric.
Right.
Right. You are there to help the client or the coachee do what they want to do, but you are not there to decide for the coachee what they need to do.
Perfect. Perfect.
And this actually is extremely important to understand, because this is one place where I have seen even seasoned coaches at times go in a way in which it will not necessarily be in sync with what the coaching agreement will be. Many a times coaches come and tell you that they want to achieve something, and coaches have their own understanding of what is possible, what is not possible, what is right, what is wrong, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and their biases can then interfere with the process, which actually is related to the next competency that we are talking about, which is managing self and maintaining coaching presence. That as a coach, you cannot be emotionally affected by the choices the coaches as that the coach is making. If you are, then you need to work with yourself and refer the coachee to someone else.
Right.
Right. For example, again, I took the example of business and service, right? Let's say as a coach, I have always been told, or I have always learned that setting up your own practice is better than working under someone.
Right.
Okay. When I say as a coach, it's not only as a coach, but also as a part of my upbringing, as a part of the conditioning that I've received from my family and so on.
Right.
Right. Now my coachee comes and sits in front of me and tells me that I want to make more money and I'm doing a job. Now you end up telling a coachee that no, job के अंदर तो आप कितने पैसे कमा सकते हो ना? How much would you earn in coach in your job? You will have to leave your job and set up your own enterprise. Right. Now what's really happening is, again, it does not remain a client-centric process because I'm the one making a decision for the coachee. Second, I am getting affected by the choices the coachee is making. It's my biases which are coming up into play.
Absolutely. Yes.
Right. Now the problem with this is, one, the coachee can see through this. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of coaches stop sessions, because they start feeling that it's my coach who was trying to make decisions for me. And while a lot of coaches may come and tell you, "Aap batao, what would you do if you were in my position?" None of them really want to get an answer to that.
Right.
Right. And that's another part of your coaching presence, where you don't get cornered because a coach has asked you a question. You have the presence to be able to take that question and turn that question into another question for the coaching. That you will only be able to do if you are in the right mental state to be able to do that. And that's where your coaching presence comes in.
Right.
Right. Coaching presence would also include the fact that you're able to empathize with your coachee. There are places where your coachee would tell you certain things that you feel is not such a big deal. Right. But for the coachee, it is a big deal. So your expressions, your body language, your tone, your words should not make the coachee feel that you are not able to understand them. And that again becomes a part of your how you're able to experience that coaching session internally, and how your presence reflects that experience that you are having as a part of that coaching session.
Absolutely.
Right? Your confidence in your abilities is another part of the story. The only way you can manage your coaching presence effectively is if you are confident of your abilities, both to be able to manage your emotions and to be able to help the coachee manage their emotions.
Right. Right. Correct. Okay, Nitin, I'm going to pause you here. A few questions and comments. Okay, so Suruchi said listening skills is very important, which I think is very true. We agree, Suruchi. And we will talk about it in detail when we come to effective communication competency. So Malata is saying, what about fickle, confused coaches?
Change your coach. That's the only answer that I can give
Yeah,
you.
yeah, it's a simple but brilliant answer, I think. Okay. And Suruchi is asking, giving examples and choices is okay, not final decision, right?
So Suruchi, giving examples and choices, see, it depends upon what kind of examples and choices you're talking about.
Right.
But truly speaking, I would actually ask the coachee, personally speaking, to tell me what are the choices that they have, or what can they do to come up with more choices.
Right.
Right. I am not in favor of even giving choices to the coachees. The reason is, the moment you give a choice, the problem that we face is the coachee feels it's your choice. It's what you think is the right thing to do.
Right.
right? And then that has a possibility of derailing the session, because then they start feeling that because you have given these options, you will drive them towards these options, and then they start resisting and questioning those choices a lot more than what they should. So my general experience has been that it's okay for clients to take more time to come up with their own choices. And at times the choice, so for example, there are places where a client is not able to come up with choices, and then I ask the client, so what can you do to be able to come up with better choices?
Correct.
Right? And then the client tells me, or the coachee tells me that, I can speak to my parents, I can go through this particular book that I have, I can search on Google. I say, brilliant, so go ahead, do that, come up with a list of choices, and we can continue in the next session.
Perfect.
But I would want the coachee to make that step, take that step to come up with choices to me, because when they come up with choices, even if the choices are given to them by their parents, right, they are the ones sharing those choices with me, so at least they don't feel that I am biased towards a particular choice. And that becomes extremely important in a coach-coachee relationship, that the coach should not only be unbiased, there should also be the appearance of unbiased. It's like in law that they say that there should not only be justice, but there should also be the appearance of justice.
Right. And that also ensures, I think that makes it simpler for the coach to, keep their bias out, be empathetic and so on, because you are not suggesting anything. So that completely takes away the possibility that you may unknowingly end up adding something to their, as we say, the map, right?
True.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. So I think we have understood why a flexible approach is important. While you may want to work in a structured framework, which is all right, but within that framework, you can remain flexible enough to adapt to the pace at which the client is progressing, or the direction in which they're progressing, right?
Correct.
Right. And the second you also spoke about, and I think that's another very key element, I can say this from my experience, to be able to manage self. So managing your own mental state, I think, is another critical ingredient in the entire process.
In fact, Mamta, for me as a coach, probably that's the most important skill set, because once you're able to manage your thoughts and your emotions relatively effectively, everything else can fall into place.
Right.
Because the rest are skills. Right. But this is the primary skill which will help you work on all the other skills. I know of coaches who have told me that I know I need to develop additional skills as a coach. But every time I start a course, or every time I start with a book, I have a thought in my head, yeah, baad mein karenge. It's more important to do something else right now. Now, they know that they need to develop more skills, right? Yep. But their own thoughts, their own emotions are coming in the way. Right. There are places where I've had coaches telling me that, Nitin, there are places where I know my biases are playing up during the session, right? And I know I need to do something about it. Okay? But once the session comes to an end, I get so tired, and then I feel, theek hai, baad mein dekhenge. And then that baad mein dekhenge never really comes.
Right. Right. So it's not a bad idea. In fact, it's a brilliant idea for a coach to have their own coach. And in fact, I believe that it would be ideal to, if you can probably get into a training program or upskill yourself in a way that you can also build these skills and competencies, like being able to manage self.
Correct. So that's actually the objective of training programs. So a lot of people in coaching confuse coaching certifications for legality. Right? Coaching is a non-regulated field.
Right.
Right. But then that brings us to a question: why attend a coaching program if it's not going to influence legality at all? If tomorrow I can get up and declare myself as a coach, why should I even attend a coaching program?
Right.
You attend a coaching program not for certification. Certification is just a way for the institute to know that you have done courses with them, so that they can follow up with you in future, and if there's any complaint, they can also follow up regarding that. But in reality, the purpose of doing a coach certification or a coach training is for you to be able to develop these skills. Right. And if you feel that you will be able to develop those skills by yourself, well, that's okay, but I would still recommend join. And it's not that you do a course with us. Go through different coaching certification programs, listen to the trainers, speak to them, but attend the program, because eventually it's about your skills, and that's what will help you scale your work as a coach, and that is also what will eventually make you feel good or bad about the kind of work that you're doing. Right. And as an extension of that, Mamta, that's where mindfulness comes in. That's where emotional intelligence comes in. So when we talk about mindfulness, when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's not just in terms of how you can help your clients develop mindfulness and how you can help your clients develop emotional intelligence.
Correct.
Your entire coaching presence depends on your ability to be mindful. If I'm working with my coachee, and while I'm having an interaction with my coachee, I'm mindful of every conversation that I'm having, the words that I'm speaking, the thoughts that I have running in my head, right? Then the chances that my biases will influence the session is unlikely because of my mindfulness.
Right.
But if I'm not mindful, then I may be biased and I'm not even aware of the fact that I'm biased.
Right.
And that has a greater potential of affecting the client sessions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So please share any questions if you have on whatever we have discussed so far. Meanwhile, Suruchi has a question specifically for you, Nitin. What charges to charge for life coaching? And the client asks, how many sessions will it take? Can you throw some light on that?
So for me, my charges are 3,500 per session, but that's actually because my primary line of work is training and helping people develop coaching competency. So this is not really what I do. The cases that I take are generally cases which are referred to me by other coaches when they are not able to work with a particular situation or a particular client, and then they refer that to me. The funny thing is, a lot of people who refer cases to me are people who charge more than I charge.
Okay.
So the reason I mentioned this is because when you ask what should be the coaching charges, actually there is no specific answer to that. That's a decision that you have to make. My suggestion to people is my charges are actually 3,500 because they've been 3,500 for some time and they've just remained. I've just not updated them for a long time. In fact, I have some of my coaching clients who come to me who started like 6 years back, who were paying 2,500 when I started, and I still charge 2,500 for them, because for me, as I said, this is not really a matter of bread and butter. This is what we are continuing with. For me, this is more like a ground where I can try new things. I can work with coaches who are also interested in exploring new things because they've explored other things that have not worked for them. Right? But if I have to give you an average, on an average, coaches charge anywhere between 1,500 per session to 5,000 per session. I'm talking the average. Highest can go probably up to 55,000 per session also, if not even more.
Yeah.
How many sessions? Again, on an average, most coaches would tell you 8 sessions to 12 sessions, and they would ask for payment in advance. Okay. How much should you charge? Now that answer is, what kind of clients do you have? Which doesn't mean that you change your charges from client to client. It simply means look around you, check what are the financial capabilities of people around you, because it's those people who will either come to you for sessions or they will refer people to you for sessions, which means that's the income capacity they have to be able to pay to you. And that's your starting point. And then as your circle starts expanding, and if you have people who are coming to you who are from a higher income background, then you'll have to upgrade your the coaching sessions, because otherwise they wouldn't come to you. So the problem with coaching pricing is not what is your worth. It is actually what people around you are able to pay. And I know a lot of people will tell you otherwise, that no, you should decide what you're worth and you should charge that much. But the point is, let's say you are living in a society where you're living in a situation where all your friends are earning in a capacity where they can only pay around 2,000, 2,500 per session. You may feel you're the best coach in the world and you should be charging 50,000 per session, right? But unless you work with people, people don't know that you're the best coach. So it's a chicken and an egg story.
Right.
Right. So it's better to start with, when you're starting fresh, looking at what is the income background of people around you. Do a quick survey as to how much they are capable of paying and how much their friends and family would be capable of paying. That becomes your starting point. And then over a period of time, you can scale your charges. That depends upon, again, the kind of circle that you are networking with.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
right?
All
That's a
right.
more pragmatic way of pricing your sessions.
Yep. That sounds fair. Right. Right. So Nitin, we were talking about the coach-coachee relationship, and we spoke about how flexibility is important, how being able to manage your own self, your own mental state is important. Um, what about trust, establishing trust, and avoiding things like transference, counter transference?
So actually, transference, counter transference would also become a part of coaching presence, where if the where I don't start as a coach, I don't start projecting things on my coachee, right? So let's say I have a coachee who comes and says, I want to make career choices, and my parents want me to make choice A, I want to make choice B,
Correct.
and I'm not really sure how do I go about it, right? Uh, and you have a child, or as a coach I have a child who is also in that situation where my child is not listening to me. Now I want to influence my coachee to agree with the parents because I want my child to agree with me, right? This I have to be careful about. So that's again where your coaching presence comes into play, where you realize that you have to be mindful of what's happening in your life and you have to keep that separate from your coaching sessions.
True.
There's also possibility where your coachee comes and sees you as a parent figure,
Right.
and starts projecting the emotions that they have towards their parents towards you,
Right.
right? If that is happening, it's probably a therapy client now.
Right.
Okay. And then probably you referring them to someone else would be better. If you're a therapist, then a therapist should ideally have developed the skills to be able to work with that. If you are a therapist who does not have the skill to recognize this or deal with this, then again upgrade your skills and please refer the client for the time being to some other therapist.
Right. Fair enough.
And also, Mamta, before I go to trust based, as far as coaching presence is concerned, obviously a good question is how do I develop a strong coaching presence?
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So mindfulness, uh, being able to observe your own emotions, again, which comes to mindfulness, right, is a very, very good process to begin with. And that's the actionable that I can tell you. Right. And if the question is how do I start my journey in the area of mindfulness, then probably start with small things. Every morning when you get up, begin by observing your breath for 3 rounds. Do it every afternoon before you take lunch, every night before you go off to sleep. Right. Then while you are as you wake up and as you have that sip of water after you wake up, notice how that sip of water kind of goes into your system. If you can kind of follow that sensation in your body. Right. When you're walking on a floor, notice if you can feel the touch of the floor on your skin. So just focus on something which is extremely observable. Right. And don't try to overdo it. Don't try to maintain that mindfulness state for 24/7. Assign yourself specific times. They're all right. This is the time when I'm going to practice mindfulness. And you'll be surprised that it actually slowly starts becoming a way of life, because that's how you learn everything. You begin step by step, and then it kind of gets incorporated in your system.
Right.
If you can do courses on mindfulness or on structured meditation, brilliant. If you could join us for a course, even better. But then obviously I'm kind of biased towards the courses that we conduct.
Right. But we do incorporate all these elements, Nitin, and we also ensure, that in terms of being able to manage self, being able to be mindful ourselves as practitioners and coaches. So we do incorporate those elements, and we do ensure that people who train with us are able to develop those skills and competencies and that state. Yeah.
So to be true, while I keep saying that I'm biased in favor of our courses because we created it in-house, but the truth also is that bias is not bereft of facts. There is a basis on which we or I personally would say that the courses that we conduct are incredibly powerful.
Yes. Thank you so much for saying that.
Now, coming to your last point,
Yes,
trust-based
right.
relationships,
Right,
right?
right.
So obviously, trust becomes the basis of your interaction with your client. Now, trust doesn't necessarily mean that the client agrees with you.
Mm-hmm.
Trust simply means that the client knows that you have the client's interest at your heart, which is one, that you are willing to listen to the client, understand the client, and that eventually it's the client who would make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
And you will help the client apply those decisions in the best and the most effective way possible.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So for us, that's the definition of trust. And if you actually notice, the previous two competencies of having client-centric approach and maintaining your coaching presence is all what you need to do to create a trust-based relationship. You don't really need to do anything more than that.
Right.
In terms of strategies, there's something called as spacing and leading that you can use, which will help you establish rapport more quickly. And that rapport would eventually help the client trust you better.
Perfect. I think all the three elements that we spoke about in terms of establishing the relationship are like overlapping, and they kind of hold each other up, right? Okay, fair enough, right?
So Mamta, just I remembered something when I was talking about mindfulness.
Yes.
There's a student of mine in Delhi who focuses on mindfulness a lot, right?
Okay.
And I was speaking to her once, and she tells me that to all my clients, I tell them there are 3 times during the day when you need to be only focused on doing what you are doing.
Okay.
Those are the 3 times during the day when you have to be completely mindful. And if you can be mindful in those 3 times during the day, then you'll be surprised how mindfulness starts becoming a part of your life.
Right.
And I asked her what those 3 things are. Right? She said, when you eat, you should only eat. That is a time when you should not be doing anything else. So that's one place of mindfulness. Right? When you are sitting on a pot,
okay,
you should only be doing that. You should not be doing anything else.
Okay.
You should actually be able to observe the entire process and the entire sensations in your body.
Right.
Right? And when you take a bath, you should only be taking a bath. Just observe how that water falls on you, how it drops on you, how the sensations are when it kind of rolls down your body, and so on. If you can be mindful in these 3 situations, okay, you will notice developing mindfulness becomes a lot more easier over a period of time. And it kind of makes a lot of sense with what she says.
It's actually brilliant. I was about to say that, because these 3 tasks are places where I think most people just drift through and but forget about mindfulness, not even aware of, like absent-mindedly taking a shower or eating in front of the TV or, in front of our laptops and so on. So I think that's brilliant. She is like pinpointed those 3 important areas. So yeah. I think that's good. That's a good idea, actually.
Perfect. So that's about trust-based relationship.
Right. Perfect.
So, any other questions that you have that you would like to ask me?
No, I think I have asked all my questions. I'm just going through the 2 places where I'm expecting. So if anyone has any questions, please do ask us now. We have a few minutes before we wind up today's episode. Any questions on whatever we have discussed today and before this? Nitin, there was a question that you said you will take up at the end because it was not exactly about coaching.
I'm taking that question up. So that was by Suman Lata, and she had asked about something to do with psychology.
Psychology qualifications.
Correct. So explain about PG in psychology with regular mode and UGC accredited correspondence mode to work as therapist. Can you highlight? Okay. So as far as this is not related to coaching, I'm kind of extending and going outside the coaching because this question was asked. Meanwhile, if you have any other questions about coaching, please ask so that I'll answer that after I've answered this question.
Right.
Now, as far as PG in psychology is concerned, so the current acceptable understanding is this, that therapist is not a word which is legally regulated. There is no real definition of that word right now. So technically anyone and everyone can call themselves therapist. I don't agree with that. I don't like that, but that's the current understanding. Okay. As far as psychologist is concerned, the situation is different. For you to call yourself a psychologist, you need to have completed your master's in psychology from a UGC recognized university. It can be from a full-time mode or a distance mode, right? A regular mode or a distance or a correspondence mode, both is okay as long as the university from which you have done your master's is UGC recognized.
Right.
That's something that you have to keep track of. PG diploma in counseling guidance is not equal to master's in psychology.
Right.
Okay, so there are a lot of 1-year diploma courses which are on counseling guidance, psychology, psychotherapy. They are not masters in psychology. Even the program, for example, that we do, the cognitive hypnotic psychotherapy, the eligibility for that is that you need to at least be pursuing a master's in psychology, because that's not a replacement to your master's degree.
Correct.
In terms of skill sets, probably you are learning a lot more with us, but legally speaking, you still need to do your master's in psychology to be able to practice as a psychologist.
Correct.
Now, in psychology itself, there are like other classifications. So clinical psychologist is the one which is the interesting distinction, because clinical psychologist is a word covered under the Mental Health Act. And for you to be a clinical psychologist working in the area of rehabilitation, you need to not only complete your master's in psychology, you need to also do your MPhil from a RCI recognized university, and you need to be registered with RCA.
Right.
Okay. And psychiatry is obviously a different ballgame altogether. That's a different field altogether. That has nothing to do with psychology per se. In the sense, not education wise.
Right.
Right. And then you have industrial psychology and other fields of psychology. Again, the bare minimum is you need to have completed your master's in psychology, and then you need to have done some specialization in any of those areas. I hope, Sumanlata, that answers your question.
Right. Okay. All right. I don't see any more questions, Nitin, I think.
So I'm going to thank all of you first, those who are on the Facebook Live, because I'm going to close the Facebook Live session first. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please ask us. If you have any questions from the previous sessions, then do share it in the WhatsApp group that we have, so that I can take those questions up in the next session before we begin. All these sessions get updated on the YouTube channel. So if you have not been able to join us today, you can watch the episodes tomorrow. For those of you who are not aware, we have been having this Visit MHP challenge, where we are requesting more and more people to visit a mental health practitioner even before it's too late. So the moment they start experiencing emotional discomfort, just like when you have pain, you don't wait for that pain to become so problematic that you're not even able to get up, right? You visit a doctor prior. So that's the same thing that we are recommending to people to visit a mental health practitioner the moment they start experiencing emotional issues, or they have certain thoughts that start bothering them.
Right.
To know more about that challenge, please visit mhp.com. If you are a mental health practitioner, please join us in that challenge. Please share content related to people joining you for sessions. Even before it's too late, you can add your number, your contact details, so that they can join you. But help us take that initiative forward, because I really think that is one initiative that is very, very required in the environment that we are in today. As a part of that initiative, I promise and I commit that whenever I have a situation where I feel the need to visit a mental health practitioner, or I feel that I'm emotionally feeling a bit vulnerable, or there are certain thoughts that are bothering me, I would surely consult my mental health practitioner immediately. And I hope you would do the same thing as well, right? So I would
like to mention that people who are not from the mental health field, their coaches or trainers or anyone else, can also pledge that in case they have an issue tomorrow, they would seek help right away and not wait for it to worsen. So even you can do that.
Right. Perfect. And for those of you who would like to get more details about the work that we do and the workshops that we conduct, you can visit us on www.ichas.com.
Right.
I'll share the link probably.
Right.
Right. And also in the chat box over here. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask us. If we have not been able to answer those questions today, I'm sure that we would come back and answer those questions in the next session.
Perfect.
Right. So thank you everyone, especially the ones who are on live, because I'm going to switch off the live